welcome back to another episode of Ask Mom
and Dad.
Or maybe more like Mom and Dad talk about things that someone might care about.
I care.
Less than. Yeah, and I do too. And in fact, we've been talking about how you were asked when you were doing some Uber work when we were up in Washington, asked a number of times, so what's your secret? How come you've been married so many years or whatever? I was thinking, and we kind of found it funny because we've talked about this week how there's not really a lot of secret. There's just really a lot of hard work. And I think if anybody knew our true tale, they'd probably laugh because we're kind of like the epitome of example of how
we were a tale of two cities. I came from the city and you did not.
Yeah, exactly. Two different worlds, two planets.
That's fair.
That's the
fair.
whole Venus and Mars. Yeah, that's exactly us. It's more like Venus and Jupiter or something. I don't know. But we were reminded
Tonya
of that
is from
this
Venus.
week.
Greg is from somewhere nobody's discovered yet.
We talked about it in light of, we have two dear friends this week who celebrated 53 years.
Yay, congrats.
And my mom and dad are past that too, not far from 60. It's pretty incredible to be around people who have made it that far along, especially these days. It seems like it's kind of more the trend to have many, how many marriages are you on now?
I'm still on my first, for the record.
Right. It's good to know. I think it's also interesting that in pop culture, like even on TV, it's just so reversed these days. They don't even consider marriage is like the last thing they consider in a relationship, as opposed to what we were raised with, which is if you even start to, consider that you might be attracted to someone, you better think about marriage, because otherwise you're taking risks and you're causing yourself to be in a place where it might be outside what we would believe is the best place for all kinds of
well, it doesn't matter
marriage,
what we believe. It's outside of what is
what
really
is
thing.
Right. That's a good point.
time and time
I'm just
again,
talking about from our belief system, what we believe is right is what God has said, and His standards are that marriage is the place for sex. It is the place for children. It is the place
for family.
For family, yeah. And for intimate relationship to be an example of Him. And that's what really ultimately He meant by that, I believe, way back from Adam and Eve. The whole point was that they walked with Him together. And then when they chose to walk away, it was a broken situation. So for us to exemplify that in marriage is to try to put all that back together a little bit of what He originally meant. We've been talking about we're getting together a Bible study with some couples, may be kind of focused on marriage. So we've been brainstorming and looking at different families in the Bible as well as passages that are specific to marriage, and it's been interesting.
Yeah, we're thinking about it a lot. We've been thinking about marriage a lot because, we've been married a lot of years. You and I have not celebrated 55, 53, 50,000 years of marriage. We've been fortunate enough to survive 35 years of marriage. I guess I've survived.
Yes,
I don't know which one has survived.
That's really uplifting.
Yeah, Survivor. That's like the new episode or season of Survivor. Survivor, the marriage contract.
Oh, gracious.
Marriage covenant. But we've been together for longer than we're apart now. We passed that threshold some years ago because we were 20, 21 when we got married. So, yeah, we've been married
it's a weird concept.
Decade plus past that time. I can't remember life. I can remember life without you, but mostly with the help of pictures and stories that are told to me by my brother, maybe. He's on. Anyway, so you've got something interesting.
Yeah, I just ran across this article in Epoch Times that had, because our friends celebrated their 53rd, it caught my attention because she said, today is my husband and my 54th wedding anniversary. And it sounds like she was just asked, what are your pointers? And she was thinking, well, there's probably several things out there that would be maybe even better advice. But she had a few things to say. I'll read this statistic. She said she had just read, before she wrote this article, that the U.S. now has the 6th highest divorce rate in the world. sad to hear. According to 2023 statistics from World Population Review, about 44% of marriages in our nation today end in divorce. Ugh. So, but we always know, and we've talked about this before, how some of this stuff is skewed a little bit. I think it's skewed toward ones who marry, again, like I was just saying, under the wrong circumstances, in the wrong frame of thought about what marriage even is. Definitely not have been being raised by maybe parents of longevity, in their own relationship. But there's so many factors that come in now to this statistic, I believe. And one of the things and you found another article, and one of the things that was said there was so many girls dream of the perfect wedding, but they forget to dream about the romance in the marriage, like romantic weddings, and these big, but they forget or why not dream up a romantic marriage? So there's so many factors these days that affect it. And what I was also going to add in is we've also read some good statistics that are better, at least, about Christian marriages. And I want to say particularly ones who actually love Jesus and want to honor him, have chosen that maybe even before they were married and then entered that covenant relationship from that frame of thinking. And the statistics are so much higher because, like we've said a million times, it's a decision that you make. It's not a feeling. It's not a, playing around with a cultural norm that sounds good or that tickles your fancy and, gets you some sort of clout with somebody. Oh, I'm married. I don't know. Can't be any of those things. It really has to be an actual decision and a commitment. And we like even better the term covenant.
Right.
Because it's something that you are entering into where both have to participate, both have a responsibility, but there's a higher calling to it. Yeah.
I mean, the culture, as you mentioned, is got it all backwards. Marriage is something that's, we've done everything that marriage is about and kind of lived together and been culturally this, that, or the, been culturally
completely don't even get it.
Now we're just going to put a name on it and call it marriage and not understand that marriage is that covenant, that relationship that binds us together. And it's more than just it's not a piece of paper. It's not just something that gives you civil commonality. Marriage has been redefined in our country as a civil commonality. In other words, you get married in order to have all the same civil privileges, your insurances and your name on your social security and your benefits and stuff like that. The government's put that kind of control on it, but that's not what it's intended to be, though, that because of the decline of emphasis on faith being the foundation of that, we have wound up with a cultural understanding that's not rooted in anything of substance. It's just
and it's starting to break down those privileges even, right? It's starting to see them as less and not allowing.
Yeah, and popular culture is turned, like you mentioned, the quote from that 80-year-old woman or whatever it was that said it, that it's about women have romanced these events rather than understanding that the marriage itself, it's a long event with lots of little mini events in the middle of it. We've been trying hard at being married for a long time. You and I have, and we're still trying hard to be married, and it's working. We sat in a room last night with some folks who had just come off of a marriage refreshment retreat, and they said that some of them married 49 years, and they were like, "When we're still trying to figure out these basic things."
Yeah.
And so it's not something that's just going to suddenly you're going to wake up one day and go, "I married the perfect person, and it's perfect, and all the things that are perfect, and it's just perfect exactly as I imagined it to be." Well, first off, if you imagined it a certain way, you imagined an imperfect person because you're imperfect. Yeah. You cannot imagine something that's beyond your capacity to imagine it. That was a mouthful, but you know what I'm saying.
Cute. Yeah.
So anyway.
Well, no, it's really true because we are human. And I'm sorry to let everyone in on this situation, but humanity will enter your marriage, which means that all kinds of angles on that will come to play. But you also, like we've said before, I'm pretty sure we've talked about this, you bring yourself into this situation. And so many people, leave the first marriage or the marriage they have thinking they're going to find a better situation. But they're forgetting that at least half of that they take with them to the next situation.
At least.
So, yeah, exactly.
That's like probably a low ball
Right.
estimate. You take you with you wherever you go.
It's true. So if you are not helped to understand or see this as you're entering into a literally like I wanted to say a job. That's not the right word. I don't know if it's a contract of work. I mean, it's like you're signing on the bottom line of I'm going to work at helping this person know who I am, putting up with whatever is the situation. I mean, so much of what we actually enter into marriage is left out. And like we've talked about before, we've belittled the part of it that was supposed to be only in marriage, which is the sexual intimacy. And we've made that some sort of testing ground for if I want to marry this person. And, I think I don't know what people think marriage is after
We've
that.
divorced from marriage things that define marriage, and we've added to marriage things that have nothing to do with marriage.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And so, marriage was intended to provide, if you think about one of the elements of what marriage is it creates supposed to be. Now, we live in this world where no fault divorce is a thing. So marriage is, to get out of a marriage, the only thing that is added to a marriage these days is legal consequences of property division at times. Mm-hmm. But it's almost as easy as, breaking up with your girlfriend or boyfriend in school and keeping the class ring. It's not like it's got about as much weight to it as that. And so now with no fault and other kinds of things, that it's just made it so easy to get divorced. It's marriage. Mm-hmm. You've taken away the weight of the fact that marriage is supposed to be something that is a commitment to provide security, not just for the couple, but for the family that's coming in there. There's an assumption there that says we have made a commitment for the benefit of a larger goal, a mature commitment for the benefit of a larger goal to work towards building a life together that is fruitful.
Okay,
that's not just me. It's not about me, is what I'm trying to say. It's about the larger picture.
And that's a heavy, big, huge picture. But we also know that according to the way the Bible understands and portrays marriage, the bottom line is it's also a heavy weight of responsibility when you decide to be intimate with someone else. So already that is a marriage covenant. You have been vulnerable, and you've opened this other person up to their vulnerable place. So that itself,
it's supposed to create security.
But it makes it opens a whole world of. It just occurred to me. It's just so much heavier than people have diminished it to be. And I'm talking about only in that intimate act. And we have diminished that in our society. We've made it like we've talked like they talk about using the word objectify and all that different thing. We've lowered the understanding of how people are made and how God has made us to build intimacies. He's built those innately in us, so that our vulnerable places and the things that are the becoming one understanding, from his perspective, it's a much bigger picture, and people aren't allowing that to be true. They would like to set that aside and let that not have anything to do with a man and a woman coming together. They're missing the whole point.
Let's talk about that for a second. Two becoming one. What does that mean to you when you say that? Because that becoming one. Most people go to their wedding and they hear all this religious language or this language they make up that has no meaning whatsoever, because that's happening a lot today. But when we talk about two becoming one, what does that mean to you? What do you think? Well, let me rephrase that. What do you think people think that means? Just the general culture.
Right. Well, I'm afraid they don't really think about it at all. That's what I'm trying to say. To me, though, if you, I'm trying to think of an example, like even of food. How do we have two things that, say even just salt and potato, once they touch each other and they get entwined in this, now it's a salty potato. It's no longer, you cannot divide that off anymore.
Well, too much salt is a salty tomato.
Potato.
Tomato. Well, same thing's true with tomatoes. Too much salt can make a salty tomato.
Well, what I'm trying to point out is they both change. You can no
Right.
longer just extract salt from that now. You're going to have
Yep.
part potato. And you can no longer extract potato. You're going to have part salt. That was probably a bad
I was gonna say,
illustration.
and
But
marriage is more like a cake, though, because you put things together to get a different flavor, which takes a lot of beating to get it ready to where it tastes good.
Oh, you're funny.
I know, but it's
and
true.
some baking and some,
Yeah, some cooking, some
Anyway,
baking. So
well, what I'm trying to point out, though, is two things becoming one thing is big. It's it's an ordeal, and it is now no longer, like the Bible says, you cannot separate that. Man in their own understanding cannot separate that because it's not possible. God says what God joined together, and he's the one that designed this idea of intimacy, the actual picture of two people and putting bodies literally together to become one, but also mentally and everything else. This is what I'm trying to say. It's a bigger, fuller picture. But when that begins, you can't just immediately say, no, I think I'm going to go over here and be salt again, because you've got potato on you. You know, there is no way for you to actually legitimately divide that out again and not be what you are now. That's what I'm trying to say. I'll think of a different word, because we think of it being like oil and water, and how oil and water stay separate in their container. But a lot of times you can sort of pour off the water, although you have a little bit of an oily substance probably here or there. I think it's more like the salty potato. I think you've got a substance thing that absorbs another, and you can't separate them. And so
Yeah, you can't get salt out
people
of the
may want
tomato
it to be
once the
oily.
salt's in the potato.
Yeah.
Tomato, potato. You say tomato, I say potato. Oh, I say tomato, you say potato. I'm so confused. I was thinking about this too, because one of the things that when people talk about becoming one, I miss the point is that the idea of when I get married to this person, they complete me. And I thought of one of the quotes, because when you're talking about salt is salt, potato or tomato is the same. They're both independent entities. They come
Right.
together and they make something bigger than what they are separately. Or for in
Yeah.
the case of salt, something edible, because
Yeah.
you just don't, nobody just spoonfuls salt.
Right.
Sugar, yes. Salt, no. As a matter of fact, you do that, you dry yourself out and kill yourself. And so but one woman married, what was it, 61 years of marriage, made this, that she said, never say someone completes you. You have to be a full person to be a good spouse. You're working on a new marriage and neither one of you has the time to build another person. Don't put that on them.
Oh,
and I thought that was kind of cool, because you think, well, one of the problems we have with becoming one is one of two people coming into a marriage, like I said, has this idea of what that person's supposed to be, and they set about making that other person better or
trying to
righter
make-
for me. The idea of rescuing someone for the sake of marriage. If I marry him, I'll fix him. Women tend to fall into this trap more than men, and they find out real quick that there is no fixing. It happened. Maybe it happened to you, listener out there, but did it?
Well, okay. But like we're saying, we do change. Almost immediately, we do change a little bit.
Yeah, it does.
It may not be visible. It may not be a dramatic difference in who we are, personality or the way but we do change, because now we've got another person in our lives, involved in our lives. We're committing to them. Again, I said we're vulnerable to them. There's a new thing. So the Bible says, that with Him, we become a new creation. I think that's what He intended for marriage. He wanted us to be understanding that you can't divide that out. You've become a new creation in a sense. And I've put these two pieces together. You can't divide them. Men won't be able to divide them. So as much as you give someone a divorce paper, like you said, maybe allowed in our culture and allowed in the mentality of that's a piece of paper. It doesn't divide the things that have been joined. You were talking about have to be a full person to be a good spouse. I have said to my girls, if you aren't first finding your fulfillment in Jesus, who is the one who will perfectly love you and perfectly meet every need you have, you'll go into this marriage and expect that from your spouse, and he cannot give that to you. There's no way. A man is a human, and and limited on this earth, just like, so it doesn't matter how great that man is, how wonderful character he has, or how he was raised, or
Right.
even as, polite to the day is long, servant to the day is long, whatever. He cannot perfectly fulfill every need of your heart.
Right.
And I wrote down on this paper I wrote down, an expectation is a bad word. It's a really bad word. It's probably
Well, it goes back to what
enemy
a friend of mine
of
said years
marriage.
ago. Expectation. Another word for expectation is I have a right to see you a certain way.
Yeah.
And he used to say, if you show me a man who thinks he has a right, I'll show you an angry man.
Yeah.
Same thing too. Is you show me someone who has expectations. Now, I don't want to.
Right.
There are
Well, it
certain
becomes a
expectations that you
demand.
should have going into a marriage. I expect you're not going to run around with another person once we've made a covenant
but
together.
I would disagree with the way you're saying that. We have expectations unwritten all the time and stuff like that. But going into a relationship with a human, you cannot expect them. Really, you can't expect any of that. To me, that's where, if you don't have your first relationship with God, that He's the faithful one, that He's the one that will not let you down, that He's the one that will fulfill all your hearts, then you do not have to hold that person to a standard that right up front, yes, you're committing to that, but basically, they can't fulfill that. But what I believe is you can pray, you can depend on God to bring your spouse what it is you need and help him or her to fulfill that. But it's still that you're relying on God to do that. You and I at the beginning of our marriage, it was quite a challenge because you and I, completely different people, completely different personalities, completely different upbringings, and even parts of the country that, in different ways, like you said, city versus country, and even our churches, yours would have been considered more of a
formal.
Formal high church is another way to put that. Mine was more of a country, rural setting. So there's so many pieces to those things that there's no way. And we've talked about this. One of the biggest fight against marriage is communication. So we're not even talking the same languages. We don't.
No.
Men and women talk different languages.
How do you turn on a light
personalities.
when you go into a room?
Right.
What do you do?
I think I actually turn it on.
Yeah, we turn on a light. I said turn
Yeah.
on a light, so I didn't.
You did.
How do you make
You
light
messed that
happen in a
up.
room? I walk in a room and say, "Let there be light," but I've got that relationship with God
You're
that
awful.
is a little bit more than most.
You used to, at least turning them off, you used to cut them off, right? Cut off the lights.
Switch off, cut off.
I never
Switch
grew
was
up cutting
they had
off
the
the
buttons
lights.
in the older times. I don't know if they called them switching. Maybe that's where switching came on. Turn is a knob. When you think of turning
Right,
off a knob, is not,
right.
and the switches now are flips. So flip on the lights.
Flip sounds right, but neither one of us said it. But you said, I think, cutting or whatever. Anyway, but yeah, that's a good example of just talking different languages just because you happen to grow up in a different area. But men and women, we know also, literally, and I think that's what, when you're talking about the lady who mentioned the retreat and how she still tries to go to those to learn more about her husband and whatever. Men and women, I don't know that we ever really understand each other. We are completely different sides. Our best illustration has been that mug and how we're completely different
always on
sides of that same mug. It may
shared
be
that
the
yesterday with
exact
our men's
same
group.
mug, but it's so different from my side versus yours. We've talked about different
Their suggestion was to get mugs
ways.
without handles. That's how men solve a problem. I had said
funny,
it.
yeah.
I suggested it. I used it as an example in communication in our men's group yesterday, and I laughed when they said you should get them without handles. I said this is how men handle things, and everyone in the room went.
We would still say, though, if we held up a mug like that, even if it's got a flower pattern all the way around, it still looked different on my side than yours, and my description of it would be different.
All right, and I wanted to say something a minute ago, and I was looking it up, so I forgot to hold you when you were talking about standards in the marriage, or not standards. You said
Expectation?
expectation. We're still kind of on the expectation things, how we see things. And I was thinking, unless we have something larger than ourselves, you said, Jesus, which is correct. But I want to say that just in more generic terms, we have to have something that something will define for us what our expectations come from. And I was reading this morning in Romans 7, and Paul said, that is the law good? And he says, of course it's good. He says, if I didn't have the law, then when covet comes around, how would I know what coveting was? Well, another way to put that, he said, I would take something that is a sin and take it into it and make it a virtue. That's what he's saying. Because how would I know it's wrong? I might make that very thing that's wrong a virtue if nothing tells me that it's not. And here's the thing: we talk about sin and stuff like that. What Paul's saying here is he's saying that thing which is meant to destroy me, I would make it a virtue, not knowing it would destroy me unless something told me it would destroy me.
Interesting.
And so I think we need to understand, and why we're having this conversation is because without a proper understanding of what marriage is supposed to be, we wind up adopting expectations from a culture or from something that might mean for our destruction rather than choosing something that is meant for our good. And the things that that culture and television and theater and just songs and all that,
Books
the things that are happening there is things that are destructive are being elevated as virtues.
Yep.
And as a result, what is happening in our society? Well, we have 75% of certain cultural races in our country that have boys coming up in homes without fathers, children coming up with homes without fathers. We've got people that are choosing to walk away, not even try marriage because they just see it as they don't think it has any worth or value. They just live together. They just do all the things without any of the safety guardrails. They're walking on a high wire and thinking they're standing in an open field, and that wire is just one step in the wrong direction. They're gone.
Yeah. Because there are parameters God has given us for trust and for, like you said, security that is meant to give us that place where we can, we've said this in the past, where we can grow, where we can thrive, where we can be challenged, but because we're going to have challenges. I'm just trying to live in the same place with someone who's completely different habits, stays up late versus gets up early, showers.
Don't be bringing our own laundry into this.
Liquid shower gel as opposed to soap. That's just silly, but I'm just being silly. But I'm saying we're so different.
I'm trying to think.
We can't even peg what the differences are, is my point. And yet,
but see,
if we don't enter that with a commitment already up front, those little things start to irritate, they start to whatever, and then we start to think, well, I don't like you because you do this way. Surely I can go find someone else who can do it this way. That's what I mean by it's become so shallow, the way we treat relationships in that way. So
and let's just be honest, if you've got a puzzle
marriage.
and all the puzzle pieces are the same shape, you can't interlock them. And so there has to be some elements in which we're different so that we can fit together to make a better picture. Unless all the pieces are square, but you still got to put the picture together in the right order.
Interesting.
That would be painful. Would you hate to do a puzzle the way all the pieces were exactly the same?
Well, the point is that it should be interesting, if that's what you mean.
Yeah,
but
that's
I think
what I mean.
it's too much of a challenge sometimes, and people don't, because they haven't entered into this covenant that says, like Ruth Bell Graham used to say, divorce is not an option. Now, murder, that's another thing. We'll talk about that later. Now, the point being that we can't enter this thing, this covenant, this relationship, this intimacy, and enter it frivolously, considering that this or that thing, pretty light, could make us walk away. That's why the Bible really only deals with infidelity as something to be hanging on to a little heavier, because it's definitely a threat to the marriage much more than...
Another quote from another one of these dudes from this thing I read the other day. 57 years married, man says, marriage is commitment, not a lifestyle accessory, which is great. Too many people like the idea of marriage, but not the work, and they just bail out for no good reason.
Yep.
That's why he's been married 57 years. He's doing the work. And men, you should understand that. Marriage is work. I mean, you can see, if you stop to think about it, women put in work too, but on the man's side, you need to do a lot more work than she does. Women are a lot better at just being communal than men. We're kind of loners sometimes. We can choose to walk away. That's why women, come home at the end of the day and they got, more, they want to talk, and you're like, maybe you're winding down and you're like, I don't want to talk, or whatever. They do that naturally. You get women together in a room, you know the whole thing. They go to the bathroom together. They, all that jazz that women do, guys don't do. They share food. Stuff guys don't do. We got to work at it. So what you do is you learn to share your food with your wife, and you don't have to go to the bathroom with her, but you can you can have some more conversation. On a side note, let's transition here. The whole point of the beginning of this conversation was we wanted to talk about an article that you did. Yeah. So why don't you tell us what we're going to do? I think you and I are just going to react. Well, this is Greg and Tonya React.
Yeah, there's 5 points here that she said are things.
Who is she?
So her name. I don't know, actually.
Who cares her name? Just who is she? Just a person that's been...
What I already referenced. She's been married, it's her 54th wedding anniversary, and she said, I guess a marriage that's lasted this long is beginning to be quite unusual. So she wanted to pass on to anyone reading this article her 5 lessons that she learned in her 54 years of marriage. She said, that's one nice thing about reaching my age, and she turned 80 this year. People think maybe you are, quote, old and wise, and maybe they will pay more attention and take your advice. And I'm thinking, yeah, right. I feel like so many of the young people just kind of roll their eyes. They don't actually listen even to the perks. And, I mean, one of the things that, as women, one of the things the safety of marriage does is it's protection. It's God's protection. Mm-hmm. Not just... do I go to bed at night and know who I'm sleeping beside, know everything about him, really, since he was 20 years old at least, know who he loves and what he's doing, for the most part. Now, there's some weird situations out there, but for the most part. But also, I can go to bed at night without a sense of vulnerability to the rest of the world. It's a sense of, like we talk about with children and how 2 parents give them 2 pieces of a whole that cause them literally a shelter over their hearts and minds and heads is as a protection. And that's true for women as well. I believe God really did set up marriage, even maybe more so for women, but for men it's probably a different style of security or a different type. Anyway, there's things like that.
Well, I think if you want to look at it from an animalistic point of view, and we're pack animalistic point of view. Oftentimes, the male winds up being the guardian, the protector. It creates a safe place for life to happen. Whereas the nurture to allow nurturing to happen, protector, because the pups are, if we look at it from like an animal dog or whatever, pups are vulnerable when they're small, but the mother needs to nurture them and help them to grow strength so they can self-contend, and so there has to be something that protects the child. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is what you're saying is there's this sense or need for something to create or something that creates an environment where nurturing and family can evolve healthily. Is that do you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I was just talking about protections for the individual. In a covenant marriage, there's a sense of safety. And I think I was just mainly reflecting on a woman's... We're vulnerable anyway, I feel like. We're maybe more so than a man as far as just... literally just a little bit weaker, or a little bit our angle on, not tying our emotions into some things cause us a little bit more vulnerability. That's all I was trying to say. And I feel like we forget that we kind of need that. We need that safety net to feel like we can mess up or be something, but also here's this man that I can trust, that I know,
can help protect that. So what I'm trying to say is, in our culture that says women should be able to take care of themselves, whatever, which is bullcrap to begin with, we're not designed to take care of ourselves. We're designed to take care of each other. We're community animals. Right. We're creatures. And so what I'm saying is, when a woman is, the greatest blessing that we have as human beings is we have agency. And we'll talk about that in a second. We have the ability to make decisions, to reason, to logic. It's also our biggest downfall, because somehow or another, some dude can decide in his agency, I don't want to be married anymore, and walk away. That doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. Some of that stuff doesn't even happen in the animal kingdom. They stick to these things because they don't. There's not a choice for them.
We can talk about that. That was one of these 5 points.
Yeah, what we're looking to do is make sure that we come together for the purpose of creating an environment that is secure so that life can thrive. Okay, so I'm just trying to make it as generic as possible, but as broad as possible. Go ahead.
This one, it was actually number 2, but that's okay. I wanted to kind of skip number 1, come back to it at the end anyway.
Okay.
Number 2 is honor and respect your spouse's agency. So you address that. The way she put it, each person has his own free will or agency. the only person you have the ability to change or the right to change is yourself, not your spouse. So when you change yourself and your attitude, it might have an effect on your spouse, or it might not. You may give suggestions, but in a kind manner, not by force or abuse. And we in churches say, you're not your husband's Holy Spirit. However, I believe just like God has given us the Holy Spirit to walk alongside us, to walk inside and help us understand truth, the spouses are there to help us learn, to help us grow, to show things that maybe the other person isn't seeing. And there's a depth to that people outside of a covenant relationship of marriage, I think anyway, don't see through. Now, that's a struggle sometimes because either the man doesn't really want the opinion of the wife, or the wife says it wrong and doesn't, whatever, or maybe the woman's in the kitchen making a meal and the man comes in and says, I might add some such and such stuff. She doesn't really want to, or doesn't want that advice, whatever. But the bottom line to now being in this relationship is you can kind of struggle with that. Well, do I want to consider what he or she said? And should I? And then, like we're saying, if you're in a covenant relationship that's based on the love of God in your life, then you definitely want to consider, because it could be God's love toward you that's coming from them in whatever it might be.
But there's a level of trust that has to be there for that to happen. So how do you build that trust?
Definitely.
And I think this is somewhat addressing, and been married 50 plus years. Hopefully there's trust. You've survived that long.
Right.
But I think there's also this addresses the question we talked about a little bit earlier with don't go into the marriage thinking you're going to make that person into something.
Yeah.
You got you to deal with.
Right.
The only person you can change is you. So if you want someone to love you better, love them better, and hope it's a good example, and help it to be. Don't tell them you need to love me better. Well, first off, maybe they came from. We talked about different cultures and environments. My family wasn't huggy. They weren't touchy-feely, and I'm kind of a touchy-feely guy. I like someone to pat me on the shoulder. A kind word and a pat on the shoulder goes a long way with me and with Judah, some of our children, and others like Noah. Don't touch me. There's different kids.
On the other hand, your mom would not let you help out in the kitchen.
Right.
So here is me thinking, I've got all these kids, I'm struggling in the kitchen, and I
you
need
wonder
some help.
Why this man won't help me in the kitchen?
Why won't you come
Because
over
I
and
got
help
in
me,
trouble
or-
and I helped in
Yeah.
the kitchen. I still get in trouble, but for different reasons. That doesn't go there. I'm sorry.
You are not getting in trouble by washing dishes these days, though.
Okay, I'll take it. I'll take the win.
Many, many years of, why won't you come help me wash dishes?
Okay,
And that
now
was
wait a minute.
struggle.
Don't tell them my past. Just celebrate my current.
It was a struggle for us. And it, like you just said, it was a little bit, because if you feel unloved by those actions or not loved by a particular action, like we said about expectation,
Right.
that builds up. And what I was going to say, the only thing I would add to her list is it takes a whole lot of forgiveness. You have to keep on realizing, like you just said, I cannot fix this person, but I have to forgive them. Because if you don't, you're also going to grow bitter. And so many, even long relationships, sometimes can grow bitter. And you can see it that they've just stayed in there because they were told to. But you can thrive when you meet when you understand. The Bible says you've been forgiven, so offer forgiveness. So when you keep yourself at the level you need to be, like you just talked about, realizing that you can't change anyone except your own self. I can offer forgiveness. I mean, you may not deserve it, but I can keep offering it, and it is something that is within me, not you have to do this so that I can forgive you, or you need to forgive me. I can't demand that from you. I'm the only one that can offer that and be that, and that's the next one on our list too. Is number 3. It says realize who has control over your emotions.
That's right.
It's
Nobody.
only no. It's only
that's not
you.
the right answer?
No.
Okay. Oh, darn it.
You, yourself, and you. You get to choose to be angry or upset or to forgive. It's literally your choice. Now, there are people that are hurt by severe situations, and it's a much harder place to go toward forgiveness. So, but we've heard of many couples who've gone there, even in the most difficult of circumstances. And so it still is a choice, even though, I think of so many times in just different relationships, if we could be put ourselves in Jesus' shoes and understand that he looked right in his betrayer's face and still shared bread with him and loved him. So even knowing that there is availability to forgiveness.
Well, but to be able to
it's just
forgive
not
somebody
easy.
or to be able to be in control of your own emotions, you have to have an understanding of what that looks like. In other words, a lot of people truly believe that they get
Having
angry.
been
I'm
forgiven.
angry because you made me angry. Well, that's
Yeah.
not in truth. That's not a thing. But I think sometimes the moment from agitation to ignition, using anger as an example, is more common because everyone's been in traffic. Is such a short distance that people think it's something that happened externally, when in reality, part of knowing Jesus, part of becoming into a relationship with someone, because the Scripture tells us to take every thought captive. So what has to happen for you to become angry is you have a thought that there's a stimulus, and then there's a thought, which is a response, which precipitates a response. And what I've tried to help people understand is, no matter what it is, if it's anger, just sexual desire, you can go through all the top, terrible things, covetousness, jealousy, listed, all that kind of stuff. Covetousness, jealousy. There's something that fanned a thought that you decided to act the wrong way on, and that's what this is getting at. You have control over this. There's a thought process, so you have to learn how to find the thought if something happens and
That
you're
letting run
responding
away.
to it. Well, let's take a not covetous, envy, for example. Somebody has finally experienced everything that you ever wanted to happen in your life is happening to them. And that is oftentimes a source of envy for a lot of people. They see so-and-so, and the internet has helped a lot. Social media has helped a lot because you can go online and see everybody's happy life.
Yeah.
And, because they're just giving you exactly what they think you want to see. And
Or exactly what they want.
they want you to see. And the result of that is you wind up having a thought that says, I don't get that. And then now you're beginning to have these negative things, when the reality is you need to counter that, and you have to have something to weigh that against, and that's where our relationship with Christ comes in. What do we really have in life? What are the gifts that we really have in life? And so taking your thoughts, realizing who has control of your emotions, means you have to recognize that what you have is a thought problem. You have a heart problem.
Right.
That is what you desire, that's fanning a thought that may or may, and I'm going to stick with the term that is destructive.
Yeah.
Or building your life or destroying your life. What are you wanting to do? Building your marriage or destroying your marriage? Your thought life is what feeds the destruction or the building of a good marriage or a bad marriage.
Yeah. Well, and just like we were saying, where you cannot change that person, but you can make a choice to change your emotion. First of all, anger or difficult, or even just frustration or whatever is negative. It's a miserable situation. Thankfulness, dwelling on something that's good, or the Bible says noble, or of good report, or whatever, that brings joy. It brings, probably from scientific views, it brings serotonin or whatever, those other types of things that can cause you to not be miserable, to come out of that. So that's what this is saying too. It's your choice. Now, there are times where, there's all kinds of circumstances that can come involved in that. I have a sister who was involved in an abusive relationship, and that's physical pain.
Well,
so
you don't,
there's
that's
another
not
angle
you.
on
That's something
that.
happening.
Yeah. But it's still a choice of forgiveness, of understanding, of realizing what it is that is your part in it, maybe. Some women that should be coming even out of those situations are the ones who maybe don't notice it. That's the harder part.
Speaking of abuse,
But
another
a
one
lot
of
of
those.
people don't have that situation, and I'm
ahead,
praying
sorry.
also that you, before you even go into that situation, that your prayer life, your time with Jesus, clarifies and guides you, because the Bible says, don't lean to your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him. He will direct your path. So I truly believe he's going to also show you who to be in relationship with. Now,
Right,
we
but-
can let those guards down and make mistakes, and God can redeem them. That's what he does. But
I was going to say, when you brought up abuse as a thing, and in our own example, physical abuse, we've had it in our family. You just said that. But one of the quotes that I read of a couple that was married 43 years was someone said, never cuss at each other. You might be mad, but never cuss at each other. Be respectful of one another. I would add to that to say, respect that person as you would like to be respected.
Yeah.
And
Number 5 on this one was practice the golden rule. Truly, don't throw something at that person you wouldn't want thrown at you. I mean, I'm talking about a dish in your face or whatever is what. So yeah, that's right.
Well,
And
we're going to go
again,
ahead and
there are
take a pause
situations-
right here from this episode. It runs on for quite a while, and so I thought I'd chop it up into 2 episodes and talk about longevity in marriage and the secrets to marriage as Tonya and I react to this article that we looked at together. And so we'll pick this back up next week, and you'll get to hear the rest of this episode. So thanks so much for listening, and we'll look forward to tuning in next week to hear the rest of Tonya and I as we react to this article. Thanks so much, and have a wonderful week.